They've sold out stadiums across the globe, broken records nobody thought were breakable, and built an empire that changed the music industry forever. But what if I told you that behind all that glory, every single member of BTS has faced moments so terrifying, so heartbreaking, that they almost didn't make it to where they are today? What happens when a death threat arrives just hours before a concert? What does it feel like to stand on the edge of losing everything you've worked for, not because of talent, but because the money simply ran out? How far can a human body be pushed before it completely shuts down on a stage full of thousands? And what kind of darkness does someone carry inside before turning it into music the whole world sings along to? Buckle up, because this isn't your typical feel-good idol story. This is the raw, unfiltered truth about survival, fear, and the price of greatness. These are the top 7 most nerve-wracking events in the lives of BTS members, and trust me, number 1 will leave you absolutely speechless. Number 7. Suga, the darkest chapter before the dawn. Now, before we jump into the heavier stuff, let's start with a story that honestly still gives chills every single time it's told, because this one isn't about a single terrifying moment on stage or a sudden crisis that hit out of nowhere. No, this one is about years of silent suffering, hidden pain, and a secret so heavy that if it had been discovered at the wrong time, the world might never have known the name Min Yoongi. Most fans know Suga as the genius rapper, the producer behind some of BTS's most iconic tracks, the guy who can spit bars with the intensity of a volcano and then turn around and compose a piano melody that makes you cry at 3 in the morning. But rewind the clock back to Daegu, South Korea sometime around 2010 and 2011, and you'll find a completely different person. A teenager drowning in darkness, battling depression so severe that he later admitted he didn't even want to exist anymore. Let that sink in for a second. The man who wrote Daechwita, the man who performed at sold-out stadiums as August D, once sat alone in a tiny room wondering if any of it was even worth trying. Yoongi grew up in a family that wasn't exactly wealthy. His parents worked incredibly hard just to keep things afloat, and the idea of their son pursuing music, not medicine, not law, not engineering, but music, was something that created enormous tension at home. In Korean society, especially in a city like Daegu, which is more conservative and traditional compared to Seoul, telling your parents you want to be a rapper is basically like telling them you've decided to throw your future into a burning building. But Yoongi couldn't stop. Music was the only thing that made him feel alive, the only thing that kept the darkness at bay, even just a little. So he started working underground, joining the local hip-hop scene in Daegu, performing at small venues, writing lyrics in notebooks that nobody would ever see. He was good, really good, and eventually he caught the attention of Big Hit Entertainment, a tiny, almost unknown company run by a guy named Bang Si-hyuk, who was trying to put together a hip-hop idol group. Yoongi auditioned, got accepted, and moved to Seoul to become a trainee, and that's when things got even harder. See, being a trainee at Big Hit in those early days wasn't glamorous at all. There was no fancy building, no unlimited budget, no guarantee that you'd ever debut. Yoongi and the other trainees were crammed into a small dormitory, surviving on almost nothing, training for hours and hours every single day with no certainty that any of it would lead anywhere. To make ends meet, Yoongi took on a part-time job as a delivery boy, riding around Seoul on a motorcycle or bicycle, dropping off packages and food to earn just enough money to eat. And then it happened, the accident that almost ended everything. While making a delivery, Yoongi was involved in a collision that seriously injured his shoulder. We're not talking about a minor bruise or a sore muscle. This was a legitimate, painful, debilitating shoulder injury that affected his ability to move, to dance, to perform. And here's the part that breaks your heart. He didn't tell anyone. Not Big Hit, not the other trainees, not his family back in Daegu. He hid it. He wrapped it up, gritted his teeth, and kept training as if nothing had happened. Why? Because he was terrified, absolutely terrified that if the company found out he was injured, they would cut him from the program. And if he got cut, it was over. No debut, no music career, no escape from the life he was desperately trying to leave behind. So he danced through the pain. He practiced choreography with a shoulder that screamed at him with every movement. He smiled when the cameras were on and collapsed when they weren't. And all of this was happening while his depression was getting worse, not better. The pressure of trainee life, the loneliness of being away from home, the financial stress, the physical pain, it all piled up into this massive, crushing weight that he carried completely alone.
In his mixtape track The Last, released years later under his alter ego August D, Suga laid it all bare. He rapped about having social anxiety disorder, about obsessive-compulsive tendencies, about depression so deep that he sought professional help and was even prescribed medication. He talked about how people saw him as a successful idol, but had no idea about the war that was raging inside his head. Lines like, "On the outside, I was putting on a fine performance, but inside I was going crazy," hit fans like a freight train because they realized that even during BTS's early successes, even when they were winning their first awards and performing on music shows, Suga was fighting a battle that nobody could see. And let's talk about First Love, a track from the Wings album, where Suga personified his old piano back in Daegu as a lover he had to leave behind. The raw emotion in that song, the way his voice cracks as he describes the one thing that kept him holding on during his darkest days, it's not just music, it's a confession. It's a man standing on stage in front of millions and saying, "I almost didn't make it here, and I need you to know that." What makes Suga's story nerve-wracking isn't just the depression or the accident in isolation, it's the fact that everything hung by the thinnest possible thread. If that shoulder injury had been just a little bit worse, if the company had found out at the wrong moment, if the depression had won on any one of those countless dark nights, there would be no August D, no Daechwita, no Grammy-nominated producer, no global icon. The entire trajectory of BTS could have been altered because one member was silently breaking apart and chose to keep going anyway. That right there is not just nerve-wracking, that's the kind of story that makes you look at someone completely differently. And this is only number 7. If you think this was intense, wait until you hear what's coming next, because the story at number 6 involves one member standing at a podium that most world leaders would be nervous to approach.
Number 6. RM, standing alone where world leaders tremble. All right, imagine this. You're 24 years old, you're a rapper from a country where idol groups are mostly known for catchy choreography and colorful music videos, and suddenly someone hands you a microphone and says, "Go ahead, speak to the entire United Nations General Assembly." Not a fan meeting, not a press conference, not a talk show. The United Nations, the place where presidents, prime ministers, and diplomats gather to discuss war, peace, human rights, and the fate of entire nations. The same podium where figures like Nelson Mandela, Barack Obama, and Malala Yousafzai have stood. And now, it's your turn. That's exactly what happened to Kim Namjoon, RM, the leader of BTS, on September 24, 2018. And if you think he walked up there cool and collected like he was just performing at another concert, think again, because behind the scenes, this was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences any K-pop idol has ever faced in the history of the genre. Let's set the stage properly. In 2017, BTS partnered with UNICEF for a campaign called Love Myself, which was an anti-violence initiative aimed at protecting children and young people around the world. The campaign was significant. It wasn't just a celebrity endorsement deal or a photo op. BTS and their fans, ARMY, actually raised substantial funds and spread awareness on a global scale. The campaign was so successful and so impactful that it caught the attention of the United Nations itself, and BTS received an official invitation to speak at the 73rd UN General Assembly as part of the launch of UNICEF's Generation Unlimited initiative. Now, here's where the pressure starts building. This wasn't just about showing up and looking good. RM had to deliver an actual speech, a real, meaningful, carefully crafted address, in English, which is not his native language, to an audience that included heads of state, senior diplomats, UN officials, and hundreds of international journalists. Every single word would be broadcast live around the world. Every pause, every stutter, every mispronunciation would be captured, analyzed, and replayed millions of times. And let's be brutally honest here, the skepticism was real. Before that speech, a huge portion of the international media and the general public still viewed BTS as just another boy band. The idea that a K-pop group had anything meaningful to say at the United Nations was to many people laughable. Social media was buzzing with comments like, "What are pop stars doing at the UN?" and "This is a joke, right?" The pressure on RM wasn't just about delivering a good speech, it was about proving that BTS deserved to be there, that their voice mattered, that they weren't just pretty faces singing love songs, but actual global citizens with something important to contribute to the conversation.
In interviews and behind-the-scenes footage, RM later revealed just how terrified he was in the hours leading up to that moment. He practiced the speech over and over again, refining every sentence, adjusting every intonation. He talked about how his hands were shaking, how his heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat, how the walk from his seat to the podium felt like the longest walk of his entire life. And remember, this is a man who has performed in front of hundreds of thousands of people at stadiums around the world. He's done interviews on American television, spoken at press conferences in multiple countries, and led a group of 7 through some of the most intense situations in entertainment history. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this. The stakes were simply on a completely different level. When RM finally stepped up to that iconic green marble podium with the golden UN emblem, something remarkable happened. He opened with a personal story, not a rehearsed diplomatic statement, not a generic call for peace, but a genuine, vulnerable story about himself. He talked about growing up in the small city of Ilsan, about being a kid who used to look up at the stars and dream, and how somewhere along the way he stopped dreaming because the world told him to be realistic. He talked about how he lost his identity trying to fit into what other people wanted him to be, and how music, specifically the act of creating and sharing music with BTS and ARMY, helped him find himself again. I had many faults and many fears, but I have come to love myself for who I am, for who I was, and for who I hope to become, he said. And in that single sentence, he captured something so universal, so deeply human, that it transcended language, culture, and every preconceived notion about what a K-pop idol was supposed to be. The speech went viral in a way that even BTS's biggest music releases hadn't. It was covered by CNN, BBC, The New York Times, The Guardian. Every major news outlet on the planet ran the story. The video racked up millions upon millions of views within hours. People who had never listened to a single BTS song were suddenly sharing quotes from RM's speech on their social media. Teachers were playing it in classrooms. Therapists were referencing it in sessions. It became one of the most watched speeches in the history of the United Nations YouTube channel. But here's the thing that people often overlook: the emotional toll it took on RM personally. After the speech, footage showed him visibly exhaling with relief, his hands still trembling slightly as he returned to his seat next to the other members.
Number 5. Jin, the sacrifice that silenced a nation. Now, we're getting into the territory where it's not just one terrifying moment or one bad night. This is a story that dragged on for years, consumed an entire country's political discourse, and put one member of BTS in the center of a debate so heated that even the president of South Korea had to weigh in. We're talking about the military enlistment saga. And while it technically affected all 7 members, there is one person who bore the heaviest burden, who stood at the very front of the storm, and who ultimately had to be the first to walk through that door. And that person is Kim Sok-jin, the eldest member of BTS, the man the world knows simply as Jin. To understand why this was so nerve-wracking, you need to understand something fundamental about South Korean society. Military service in South Korea is not optional. It is mandatory for all able-bodied male citizens. Every single man is required to serve approximately 18 to 21 months in the armed forces. And this is not some ceremonial, symbolic thing. South Korea is technically still at war with North Korea. The Korean War never officially ended. There was an armistice in 1953, not a peace treaty, which means that military readiness is taken incredibly seriously. Avoiding or delaying service is considered one of the most shameful things a man can do in Korean culture, and public figures who have tried to dodge it in the past have seen their careers completely destroyed. Now here's where it gets complicated. By South Korean law, most men must enlist by the time they turn 28. Jin, born December 4, 1992, was the oldest member of BTS and was rapidly approaching that deadline as BTS reached the absolute peak of their global dominance. We're talking about 2019, 2020, 2021, the years when BTS was breaking every conceivable record, topping the Billboard Hot 100 multiple times, performing at the Grammys, generating billions of dollars in economic value for South Korea, and essentially serving as the country's most powerful cultural ambassadors on the global stage. And this is where the national debate exploded.
On one side, you had people arguing that BTS was doing more for South Korea's global image and economy than any military service ever could. Studies estimated that BTS contributed roughly $5 billion annually to the South Korean economy through tourism, merchandise, brand deals, and cultural exports. Some lawmakers argued that forcing BTS to enlist at the peak of their careers was not just wasteful, it was economically insane. They pushed for a special exemption, similar to the ones granted to Olympic gold medalists and classical musicians who win prestigious international competitions. On the other side, you had a massive wave of public opinion that said absolutely not. The argument was simple and powerful. If every other Korean man has to serve, why should pop stars get a free pass? Granting BTS an exemption would be seen as favoritism toward the wealthy and famous, and it would undermine the very principle of equal sacrifice that military service is supposed to represent. Older generations, veterans, and conservative media outlets were particularly vocal. Some even accused BTS's fans of trying to manipulate the political system. Jin was caught right in the middle of this firestorm, and the pressure on him personally was almost unimaginable. Every interview, every press conference, every public appearance came with the unspoken question hanging in the air: when are you going to enlist? He couldn't escape it. The Korean media ran stories about it almost daily. Politicians used BTS's military status as a talking point in actual election campaigns. It became one of the most discussed topics in the entire country, and Jin, the eldest, as the one whose deadline was approaching first, was the face of it all. In December 2020, the South Korean government passed a revised Military Service Act that allowed top K-pop artists to defer their enlistment until the age of 30. This was widely seen as the BTS law, and while it bought Jin some time, it also intensified the debate even further. Critics called it preferential treatment, supporters said it didn't go far enough, and Jin himself was stuck in this impossible limbo, technically allowed to keep performing, but doing so under a constant cloud of public scrutiny and moral judgment. The emotional weight of this situation was enormous. In various live broadcasts and fan interactions during this period, Jin's demeanor visibly changed. He was still funny, still charming, still the worldwide handsome that fans adored, but there were moments, subtle moments, where you could see the exhaustion behind his eyes. He knew that no matter what he decided, someone would be angry. If he enlisted, fans would be heartbroken and BTS's momentum could be permanently disrupted. If he delayed further, he'd be accused of cowardice and entitlement. There was no winning move, only varying degrees of sacrifice. And then on October 17, 2022, everything came to a head. Big Hit Music released a statement that shook the entire entertainment world. BTS members would fulfill their mandatory military service, starting with Jin. No more delays, no more debates, no more hoping for an exemption that was never going to come. Jin would enlist in December 2022, and the other members would follow in sequence. The reactions were seismic. Army around the world was devastated. Stock prices for HYBE, BTS's parent company, dropped significantly. The K-pop industry braced for the impact of losing its biggest act. And Jin, the man at the center of it all, posted a selfie with his newly shaved military haircut, smiling that signature broad smile as if to say, "It's okay, I've made my peace with this." On December 13, 2022, Jin officially reported to a frontline military base in Yeoncheon near the border with North Korea. Not a cushy desk job, not a ceremonial position, a frontline base, one of the most intense postings available. He chose it deliberately because he wanted to prove that he was taking this seriously, that he wasn't looking for special treatment, that he was willing to serve just like every other Korean man. The image of Jin walking through those military gates, turning around one last time to wave at the cameras, became one of the most iconic images in K-pop history. He served with distinction, completing his service and being discharged on June 12, 2024, a date that was, poetically, also BTS's 11th debut anniversary. But the nerve-wracking part wasn't the service itself. It was the years of uncertainty, the political chess game, the public judgment, the impossible choices, and the knowledge that one man's decision would set the precedent for the 6 brothers who had to follow him. Jin didn't just enlist in the military, he walked into a national controversy with his head held high and came out the other side with his dignity completely intact. That takes a kind of courage that has nothing to do with stages or spotlights, and that's exactly why this story earns its place at number 5.
Number 4. BTS V, When the Road Almost Took Everything. Okay, now we shift gears, literally, because this next story isn't about emotional pressure or political controversy. This one is about raw, physical danger, the kind of moment where time slows down, where your body moves before your brain can process what's happening, and where the difference between walking away and not walking away comes down to a matter of seconds and inches. We're talking about the van accident of 2015, and while every member was affected, the one whose experience hits the hardest when you hear the full details is Kim Tae-young, V, because at that moment in time, he was barely into his 20s, still adjusting to the relentless grind of idol life, and suddenly found himself in a situation where no amount of talent, training, or determination could protect him. To truly understand how terrifying this was, you need to understand what daily life looked like for BTS in 2015. This was their 3rd year since debut, and they were in that brutal middle phase where they were gaining momentum but hadn't yet reached the level of success that would afford them any real comfort or luxury. Their schedule was absolutely insane. Multiple variety show appearances, fan signings, concert rehearsals, music show pre-recordings that started at 4 or 5 in the morning, followed by interviews, photo shoots, and then late-night studio sessions because they were still heavily involved in producing their own music. Sleep was a luxury, proper meals were a rare treat, and transportation between all of these commitments? A single van driven through the chaotic streets of Seoul and sometimes across long stretches of Korean highway, often in the early hours of the morning or deep into the night when exhaustion wasn't just a risk, it was a certainty. BTS didn't have the fleet of luxury vehicles and dedicated security escorts that top-tier groups enjoy. They piled into a van together, sometimes falling asleep on each other's shoulders within seconds of the doors closing, because that 20 or 30 minutes of transit time was genuinely the only rest they were going to get before the next schedule. And it was during one of these exhausted late-night transfers that the accident happened. The details that have been shared publicly paint a picture that's genuinely harrowing. The van was involved in a traffic collision. Accounts suggest it was a rear-end impact or a sudden collision situation on the road, and the force of the impact was significant enough to jolt everyone inside violently. We're talking about a vehicle full of young men who were not wearing seatbelts in the back, because, honestly, in the K-pop industry's notoriously lax approach to artist safety during that era, seatbelts in the back of a passenger van were often treated as an afterthought. The members were thrown around inside the vehicle. The shock was immediate and absolute. One moment you're drifting off to sleep after 18 hours of non-stop work, and the next moment there's the sound of metal and screeching, and your body is being thrown in a direction it was never meant to go. V, in particular, was reportedly shaken to his core. Tae-young has always been someone who feels things deeply. He's the member known for his emotional sensitivity, his artistic soul, the way he experiences the world with an intensity that most people can't quite comprehend. And being in that van, feeling that impact, hearing the sounds, not knowing in those first chaotic seconds whether everyone was okay, it left a mark that went far beyond any physical bruise. The immediate aftermath was a blur of panic and assessment. Staff members checked on the members, calls were made, and miraculously, and I use that word very deliberately, there were no life-threatening injuries. Bruises, soreness, shock, yes, but no broken bones, no hospitalization, no permanent physical damage. It was the kind of outcome that makes you exhale with relief, and then immediately feel a wave of nausea when you realize just how easily it could have gone the other way. Because let's be very real about this. Van accidents in the K-pop industry have resulted in deaths. In 2014, just 1 year before BTS's accident, the K-pop world was devastated by the tragic death of Eunbi and Ri-se from the group Ladies Code, who were killed when their van hydroplaned and crashed into a barrier wall on a rain-soaked highway. Their manager was driving them back from a schedule, late at night, in poor weather conditions, a scenario that was horrifyingly similar to the kinds of situations BTS found themselves in regularly. The Ladies Code tragedy sent shockwaves through the entire industry, and it was a brutal reminder that the relentless scheduling culture of K-pop wasn't just exhausting, it was genuinely deadly.
So when BTS's van got into an accident just 1 year later, the fear wasn't hypothetical. Everyone, the members, the staff, the fans who found out about it, knew exactly what the worst-case scenario looked like because they had already witnessed it happen to someone else. The psychological impact on V and the other members lingered long after the physical soreness faded. There's a particular kind of anxiety that comes from a car accident, a hyper-awareness every time you get into a vehicle, a flinch at sudden braking, an inability to fully relax during transit because your body remembers the trauma even when your conscious mind tries to move on. For V, who was barely 20 years old at the time, processing that kind of experience while simultaneously maintaining the public image of a carefree, smiling idol was an enormous emotional burden. And what makes this even more gut-wrenching is the context of what BTS was going through professionally at that moment. 2015 was a make-or-break year for them. They were releasing the Most Beautiful Moment in Life series, the albums that would eventually become the turning point in their career. Every schedule mattered. Every performance could be the one that pushed them over the edge from promising group to legitimate contenders. They couldn't afford to take time off, couldn't afford to cancel appearances, couldn't afford to show weakness. So they got back in the van. The next day, the day after that, and every day after that for years to come. They climbed back into vehicles and drove through the night to the next schedule, carrying the memory of what had happened and the knowledge of what could happen again. The industry did eventually make some improvements to artist transportation safety in the years that followed, partly driven by public outcry after the Ladies' Code tragedy and similar incidents. But in 2015, BTS was still operating in an environment where their physical safety was secondary to their schedule. And that van accident was a terrifying reminder that the road to stardom was quite literally a dangerous road. V rarely speaks about that night in detail. It's one of those memories that the members acknowledge happened but don't dwell on publicly, perhaps because revisiting it means confronting just how fragile everything was, just how close they came to a headline that would have been about tragedy instead of triumph. And honestly, that silence says more than any words ever could. That's number 4, and it's a reminder that the dangers BTS faced weren't always metaphorical. But if you think a car accident is the most physically harrowing thing a BTS member has endured, wait until you hear number 3, because what happened to this member wasn't caused by an external force or a freak accident. It was caused by his own relentless pursuit of perfection, and it happened right there on stage, in front of thousands of screaming fans, with cameras rolling and nowhere to hide.
Number 3. Jimin, the body that betrayed him on stage. This one is different. This one doesn't involve a threat from outside, no speeding vehicle, no political controversy, no faceless stranger sending menacing messages. This one came from within, from the very thing that made Park Jimin one of the most celebrated performers of his generation, his absolute, uncompromising, almost frightening refusal to be anything less than perfect. And the terrifying part? His body didn't send a polite warning. It didn't tap him on the shoulder and say, hey, maybe slow down. No, it shut down, right there, under the blazing stage lights in front of thousands of fans who watched in real time as the man they adored crumbled before their eyes. To understand how Jimin reached that breaking point, you have to go back to who he fundamentally is as a person and as a performer. Jimin didn't enter big hit entertainment as a natural fit for the idol world. He earned his place through sheer, raw, almost violent determination. Before joining BTS, he was a top student at the Busan High School of Arts, studying contemporary dance. He was classically trained, technically brilliant, and already recognized as one of the most talented young dancers in his region. But when he entered Big Hit as a trainee, he was suddenly surrounded by people who had been training longer, who were more experienced with the idol system, and who seemed to pick up choreography faster than he could. For someone like Jimin, someone whose entire identity was built on being the best, on being flawless, on never letting anyone see him struggle, that gap was absolutely unbearable. So he did what he always did. He worked harder. Not just harder, obsessively harder. While other trainees rested, Jimin practiced. While others ate, Jimin was in the practice room running through choreography one more time, then one more time, then one more time after that. He developed a relationship with perfection that wasn't healthy, it was consuming. Every missed step, every slightly off angle, every moment where he felt he wasn't the absolute best version of himself became a personal failure that ate at him from the inside.
And then there was the dieting. This is the part that's genuinely difficult to talk about because it touches on something deeply painful and deeply personal. Jimin, at various points during BTS's career, restricted his food intake to extreme levels. We're not talking about a healthy diet plan managed by a nutritionist. We're talking about a young man in his early 20s performing physically demanding choreography for hours every single day, sometimes eating only one meal a day or even going entire days eating almost nothing. In one particularly heartbreaking revelation during the behind-the-scenes segment, Jimin admitted that during the blood, sweat, and tears era, he had gone on a diet so extreme that he was essentially starving himself. He wanted to look a certain way on camera, wanted his jawline sharper, wanted his body leaner, wanted every single visual element to be as close to his impossible standard as humanly achievable. The other members noticed. They always noticed. RM, Jin, Suga, they all at various points expressed concern about Jimin's eating habits. There's footage of members practically begging him to eat, sliding food toward him at the table, making jokes to try to lighten the mood while their eyes betrayed genuine worry. But Jimin would smile, deflect, and then go right back to restricting himself, because in his mind, the performance was everything, and his body was simply a tool that needed to be shaped and controlled to serve that performance. Now combine all of that, the obsessive training, the extreme dieting, the chronic sleep deprivation that every BTS member was dealing with, and the relentless touring schedule, and you have a recipe for exactly what happened. During multiple performances and behind-the-scenes moments captured in the documentary series Burn the Stage, the world saw what Jimin's pursuit of perfection was actually costing him. The most devastating footage shows Jimin backstage, barely able to stand, his face drained of color, his body visibly trembling with exhaustion. In one scene that fans will never forget, he's hunched over, breathing in short, shallow gasps while staff members hover around him, trying to figure out if he can go back on stage. The other members are there too, and the fear on their faces is real, unscripted, raw. Jungkook, the youngest, is visibly fighting back tears. Suga's jaws clenched tight in that way it does when he's trying to hold in something he desperately wants to say. And Jimin? He's trying to stand up. Even in that moment, even with his body literally failing him, his first instinct is to get back out there. "The fans are waiting," he whispered in one particularly gut-wrenching moment, as if the thousands of people in that arena mattered more than his own survival. And here's what makes this not just sad, but genuinely terrifying. He did go back. Multiple times across multiple incidents, Jimin pushed through moments where any reasonable person, any doctor, any trainer would have said, "Stop, you're done. Your body cannot do this." But Jimin's definition of failure wasn't collapsing on stage. His definition of failure was not being on stage at all. He would rather physically break down in front of an audience than let them down by not appearing. That's not just dedication, that's a relationship with perfectionism so extreme that it becomes self-destructive, and watching it unfold in real time through documentaries and fan-captured footage is one of the most unsettling experiences in the entire BTS narrative. The other members have spoken about these incidents with a mixture of admiration and anguish. J-Hope, as the group's main dancer and someone who understands the physical toll of performance better than most, once said that watching Jimin push himself to that point made him feel helpless, because he knew that no amount of talking, no amount of begging would change Jimin's mind once he'd decided that the show must go on. RM addressed it too, acknowledging that as a leader, one of his greatest challenges was figuring out how to protect Jimin from himself without taking away the very thing that made him extraordinary. Because that's the cruel irony of Jimin's story. The same fire that makes him one of the most magnetic, breathtaking performers on the planet is the same fire that nearly consumed him. Over the years, Jimin has shown signs of developing a healthier relationship with his body and his expectations. He's spoken more openly about the struggles he went through. He's appeared healthier and more at peace in more recent eras, and the members have indicated that as a group, they've learned to watch out for each other more carefully. But those moments captured in Burn the Stage, those raw, unfiltered images of a young man's body giving out while his spirit refused to quit, remain some of the most nerve-wracking footage in K-pop history. Because every time you watch it, there's a part of you that wonders, what if he hadn't gotten back up? What if the next collapse had been the one his body couldn't recover from? What if the cost of perfection had been something that no amount of talent or determination could pay? That's number 3, and if your heart isn't beating a little bit faster right now, check your pulse. because number 2 takes us back to the very beginning, to the time before the stadiums, before the records, before the world even knew the name BTS, when 7 teenagers and one desperate company were staring into the abyss of total failure, and the only thing standing between them and utter oblivion was a bet that nobody believed would pay off.
Number 2. J-Hope, dancing on the edge of oblivion. All right, we've arrived at number 2, and I need you to forget everything you know about BTS right now. Forget the sold-out stadiums, forget the Billboard records, forget the Grammy nominations, forget the presidential meetings and the United Nations speeches and the billions of streams. Erase all of it from your mind, because the story I'm about to tell you takes place in a world where none of that existed yet. A world where BTS was nobody, where their company was bleeding money, and where one member in particular had already sacrificed everything he had just to get through the door, only to realize that the entire building might be about to collapse on top of him. That member is Jungkook, J-Hope, and his story during BTS's darkest financial period is one of the most nerve-wracking tales of survival in the entire history of modern music. Before J-Hope was the sunshine of BTS, before he was the explosive performer who could command a stadium with nothing but a whistle and a dance break, he was a kid from Gwangju who was already a star in his own right. Hoseok was a member of a street dance crew called Neuron, and in Gwangju's underground dance scene, he was a legend. He won competitions, he was respected by dancers twice his age, and he had a reputation as one of the most talented young street dancers in all of South Korea. He had a path, a clear, visible, promising path in the world of dance, and then he threw it all away. When Big Hit Entertainment came calling, offering him a spot as a trainee in their upcoming idol group, Hoseok made the decision to leave Gwangju, leave Neuron, leave the dance community that had raised him, and move to Seoul to chase a dream that had absolutely zero guarantees. His family supported him, but the sacrifice was enormous. He left behind friendships, a reputation, a community, everything familiar for a chance to debut in a group from a company that most people in the industry had never even heard of. And what he found when he arrived in Seoul was not exactly encouraging. Big Hit Entertainment in 2010, 2011, 2012 was not the Hybe Corporation that exists today. It was a tiny, struggling company operating out of a cramped, unremarkable building with a skeleton crew of staff and a budget that could generously be described as microscopic. Bang Si-hyuk, the founder, had previously worked with bigger companies and had some producing credits to his name, but his own venture was teetering on the edge of financial collapse. The company had attempted to launch acts before BTS and had faced setbacks. Revenues minimal, investors were skeptical, the entire operation was running on fumes and faith, mostly faith. For Hoseok and the other trainees, this meant living in conditions that were, by any comfortable standard, genuinely rough. The dormitory was small, cramped, and shared by too many people. Meals were basic and sometimes scarce. Training facilities were modest at best. And the psychological weight of knowing that your company might not survive long enough to actually debut you was a constant gnawing anxiety that never fully went away. Hoseok has spoken about this period with a rawness that cuts deep. In interviews and in BTS's own documentary content, he's described moments of genuine despair, lying awake at night in that cramped dormitory, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd made the worst mistake of his life. He'd given up a sure thing in Gwangju for this, and this was looking more and more like a dead end. The other trainees felt it too, but for Hoseok there was an added layer of pain. He wasn't just risking his future, he was carrying the guilt of having abandoned a community and a crew that had believed in him. If BTS failed, he couldn't just go back to Gwangju and pick up where he left off. That bridge was, if not burned, then certainly weakened by his departure. And it nearly did fail. There were multiple points during the pre-debut period where the finances were so dire that disbandment was a genuine, discussed possibility. Not a rumor, not fan speculation, actual conversations within the company about whether they could afford to continue. Bang Si-hyuk later revealed in interviews that there were moments where he wasn't sure he could keep the lights on, let alone debut a 7-member group with the production quality and creative ambition he envisioned. The cost of music videos, recording sessions, choreography training, styling, promotion, it all adds up fast. And when your company's bank account is approaching zero, every expense becomes an existential question.
Hoseok in particular went through a crisis during this period that fans only learned about years later. He reportedly considered leaving the group before debut. The stress, the uncertainty, the fear of failure, the homesickness, it all converged into a moment where he seriously contemplated walking away and trying to rebuild his life outside of Big Hit. The other members have alluded to this in various emotional conversations over the years, and the weight of it is staggering when you consider what the world would have lost. No J-Hope means no chicken noodle soup, no Daydream, no On the Street, no iconic dance breaks and Mic Drop and Idol, and most importantly, no emotional anchor holding the group together during their darkest times. Because that's what J-Hope became, the person who, despite his own fears, chose to be the light for everyone else. His stage name isn't accidental. He chose J-Hope because he wanted to be a source of hope for the group and for fans. And the profound irony is that he took that role during a period when he himself was running dangerously low on hope. He smiled when he wanted to cry, he energized rehearsals when his own spirit was depleted, he danced with explosive joy on the outside while carrying quiet terror on the inside. That's not just performance, that's an act of will so powerful that it borders on self-sacrifice. When BTS finally debuted on June 13, 2013 with No More Dream, the relief was palpable, but the danger was far from over. The debut didn't exactly set the world on fire. Initial sales were modest, critical reception was mixed, and the company was still operating on an impossibly thin financial margin. It wasn't until 2015 and 2016, with the Most Beautiful Moment in Life series, that BTS started generating enough revenue to stabilize the company and secure their future. That means for roughly 2 to 3 years after debut, J-Hope and the other members were still performing, still promoting, still pouring their hearts out on stage, all while knowing that one bad comeback, one failed album, one unfortunate turn of events could end everything. Living with that kind of uncertainty for that long does something to a person. It creates a hunger that never fully goes away, a gratitude that runs deeper than most people can understand, and a bond between 7 people who went through the fire together and somehow came out the other side. When you watch J-Hope perform now, when you see that blinding smile, that explosive energy, that seemingly inexhaustible joy, you're not just watching a talented performer, you're watching a man who stared into the void of total failure, who almost walked away from everything, who chose to stay despite every logical reason to leave, and who turned his fear into fuel that helped launch the biggest musical act of the 21st century. That's number 2, and if you're not on the edge of your seat right now, I don't know what to tell you, because number 1 is the one we've been building towards this entire time. It's the moment that made headlines worldwide, the moment that tested not just one member's courage, but the entire group's resolve. And it involves a direct threat to human life that turned what should have been a night of celebration into a night of pure, undiluted terror. You are not ready for this one. Number 1. Jungkook, performing under the shadow of death. This is it. Number 1, the moment that sits at the very top of this list, not because it was the saddest, not because it lasted the longest, but because it was the most immediately, viscerally, life-threateningly dangerous situation any member of BTS has ever faced. And the member at the center of this nightmare was the youngest of them all, the one they had all sworn to protect, since the day he arrived at Big Hit Entertainment as a shy, wide-eyed 15-year-old kid from Busan. We're talking about Jungkook and what happened to him, what happened to all of them before, during, and after a concert in the United States in 2017 is the kind of story that makes your blood run cold no matter how many times you hear it. Let's set the scene. It's 2017, and BTS is in the middle of their Wings tour, their most ambitious concert series to date. They're performing across multiple cities in the United States, riding a wave of momentum that's rapidly transforming them from a popular K-pop act into a genuine global phenomenon. The energy is electric, the fans are passionate beyond belief, and every single show feels like a step closer to the kind of global domination that no Korean act has ever achieved before. And then, the threats started coming. In the days leading up to their concert at the Fort Worth Convention Center in Texas, credible threats were received, threats of violence, threats of harm, threats that specifically targeted members of the group. We're not talking about vague, anonymous internet trolls posting nonsense on a forum. These were threats that were deemed serious enough to involve law enforcement, threats that forced the security team to completely overhaul their protection protocols, threats that turned what should have been a joyful concert experience into a high-security operation that felt more like a military extraction than a music event. The nature of the threats was chilling. Reports indicated that they included explicit descriptions of intended violence against specific members, with some accounts suggesting that Jungkook was among those directly named. The idea that someone out there, someone potentially in the same city, potentially planning to be in the same building, had expressed a deliberate intention to harm a 20-year-old whose only crime was singing and dancing on a stage is the kind of reality that shatters the illusion of glamour and excitement that surrounds the K-pop world. Behind the scenes, the situation was pure chaos controlled by professionalism. Security personnel were briefed extensively. Additional guards were brought in. Bag checks at the venue were intensified. Coordination with local police was established. Every single person entering that building was being watched, scanned, assessed. The staff at Big Hit were in crisis mode, making rapid-fire decisions about whether to cancel the show entirely, modify the set list to reduce the members' exposure on stage, or implement additional protective measures that could allow the concert to proceed without putting the members in unacceptable danger. And here's where it gets truly nerve-wracking. The members were told. They knew. Jungkook knew. Before walking out onto that stage, before the lights came on and the music started and the screaming began, he was aware that somewhere in the universe of possibilities, someone might be in that audience with the intention of hurting him. Let that sink in for a moment. You're 20 years old, you're thousands of miles from home, in a foreign country, about to perform in front of thousands of strangers, and someone has told you that there's a chance, maybe small, maybe not, that tonight could be the night something terrible happens. What do? Do you cancel? Do you hide? Do you refuse to go on stage and let fear win? Jungkook went on stage. They all did. Every single member of BTS walked out under those lights and performed as if their lives were potentially on the line, because in their minds, the fans who had traveled from across the country, who had saved up their money for months, who had been counting down the days to this concert, deserved to have the experience they came for. The show must go on, not as a cliché, but as a genuine act of courage that most people will never fully appreciate. But the performance that night wasn't normal, and people who were there noticed. Security presence was visibly heavier than any previous BTS concert. Staff members were positioned at unusual locations throughout the venue. There were moments during the show where the members' formations seemed tighter than usual, as if they were unconsciously staying closer together, drawing security from each other's proximity. And Jungkook, the golden maknae, the kid who usually bounced around the stage with the carefree energy of someone who believed the world was his playground, was reportedly more subdued in certain moments, his eyes occasionally scanning the crowd in a way that had nothing to do with fan service and everything to do with survival instinct. After the concert, the emotional fallout was immense. Footage from backstage and from subsequent events showed the members processing what they had just done in different ways. Some were quiet. Some tried to joke about it, using humor as a shield the way they often do. And some, particularly the older members, who felt a fierce, almost parental protectiveness over Jungkook, were visibly shaken by the knowledge that they had put their youngest member in harm's way, even though the decision to perform had been collective and mutual. The Fort Worth incident wasn't the only threat BTS received during their career, but it remains the most well-documented and the most viscerally terrifying because of its specificity, its timing, and its target. Jungkook was the baby of the group, the member who had joined Big Hit at just 13 years old, who had been raised and mentored by the other 6, who they had watched grow from an awkward teenager into a global superstar. The idea that someone wanted to hurt him specifically struck at the deepest emotional core of the group's bond and the fandom's protective instincts. In the years since, security for BTS has been upgraded dramatically. Their concerts now feature military-grade security protocols, extensive advanced sweeps, coordination with international law enforcement agencies, and personal protection details that rival those of heads of state. But none of that erases the memory of Fort Worth 2017, the night when Jungkook, barely out of his teenage years, looked fear directly in the face and chose to sing anyway. What makes this number one isn't just the thread itself, it's the combination of everything it represents. It's the vulnerability of being young and famous in a world that doesn't always respond to fame with admiration. It's the impossible choice between personal safety and professional duty. It's the bond between 7 members who collectively decided that they would face danger together rather than let fear dictate their lives. And that, right there, is the BTS story. Not just a story of 7 artists who conquered the world, but 7 human beings who faced fear, pain, danger, and uncertainty at every turn and decided every single time to keep going. Thank you for watching. And remember, behind every spotlight, there's a shadow. What matters is who has the courage to stand in both.
And there you have it, the top 7 most nerve-wracking events in the lives of BTS members. 7 stories, 7 members, 7 moments that could have shattered everything. From Suga hiding a broken body and a broken spirit just to survive trainee life, to RM trembling at the most powerful podium on earth, to Jin walking straight into a national controversy with nothing but his dignity as armor, to V sitting in a van that reminded the world how fragile life really is, to Jimin's body screaming stop while his heart screamed keep going, to J-Hope nearly walking away from a dream that was drowning in debt and uncertainty, and finally to Jungkook, the youngest, the most protected, the golden maknae, standing under stage lights that could have been his last. These aren't just celebrity stories. These aren't exaggerated headlines or fan fiction. These are real moments that happen to real people who just happen to become the biggest musical act on the planet. And the one thread that connects every single story on this list, they kept going. Every single time, against every odd, through every tear, through every fear, they chose to keep going. Not alone, but together. That's not just what makes BTS special, that's what makes them human. If these stories moved you, if they made you see the people behind the performances just a little differently, then share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because behind every anthem that makes you feel invincible, there's a story of someone who once felt like they couldn't survive the night. And they did. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay kind, and we'll see you in the next one.